Tēnā koutou katoa. It's so absolutely heartwarming to see such a full room of people here to celebrate the life of John Perry. It's my privilege to welcome you here today on behalf of the Webbs family. We're honoured to give this space to the community to observe the passing of our beloved kaumātua, John. John has been a regular attended at auctions since well before my time. He made that long trip to Helensville and back on a regular basis, and he was a much loved member of this little scene we have here, this thing of ours here. There's no more appropriate place to celebrate his life than here in the auction room. My name is Charles Leno, and I'll be officiating this afternoon's festivities. We'll be hearing from many people whose lives John touched. More than 20 tributes will be delivered, and our speakers range from John's family to his friends, from curators to collectors, from writers and filmmakers to politicians. Once this program of tributes has been delivered, I'll open the microphone to the floor so that we can hear from other members of the community with thoughts to share. John's friends and family have decorated the room with some of his possessions as well as mementos of their own. Now, anyone who has visited John's theatre out in Helensville, and I know that many of you have, will know that what we have done here doesn't come anywhere near fully representing John's diverse range of interests. What we've tried to do is bring a little bit of John into the room so that he's here with us today. And looking out around the room, around the space, looking at his cherished objects, at things we've borrowed from his friends, and the huge number of people here, people who loved him, people who cared about him, I can certainly feel his presence with us now. You're all invited to stay for some kai and some drinks after the formal part of today's memorial has concluded. And I'd like to thank and acknowledge John's wide circle of friends, family, and colleagues for helping put this all together and for generously contributing the food and refreshments that we'll be enjoying later. When we were out at John's place earlier this week, I saw something that really stuck with me. It's been rolling around in my head ever since. John framed up the phrase, "Art is where you draw the line." And for starters, well, yeah, I guess it is. It's really, really apt, and it's so John. And I think it stayed with me because it's also an analogy that could be applied to life. Life is where you draw the line. It might be straight, it might twist and turn. Whatever it looks like, it starts in one place and it ends in another. And it's always a really intimate reflection of the person who drew it. This afternoon, we have the great privilege of hearing about John's line, his path through life, hearing about its twists and turns, celebrating its journey from beginning to end. And now, to start things off, I'd like to give the floor to Hamish Coney, who will lead us through a mihi. Kia ora, Hamish.
Kia ora, Charles. Kia ora te whānau. A whiwhio nuku, a whiwhio rangi. He waitai, he huka, he hauhu, he haumihi e. Ruru whenua, e karangahi ana te whare e. Utia te papa, hakatungia nā rākau, uwhia te tina nā. Hakaputaina ki te whai ao, ki te ao marama, tihe, Māori ora. Ko te wehe ki te atua, me hakakorori a tōna ingoa i ngā wā katoa. E mihi ki te kingi Māori atu heitia, rire hau, tēnā koe, pai mārire. Koe nei te mihi ki ngā mana whenua, tēnā koutou katoa. E mihi ana hauki tēnei whare toi, e tūnei, tēnā koe. E mihi ana hou ki o tātou tini mate. Moi mai, moi mai, moi mai rā. Apati hono tātai hono, rātou kua wehi atu ki te pō. Apati hono tātai hono, tātou e tūwana ki te ao. E ngā kaimihi, tēnā koutou, mo tō rātou araha, me tō rātou manakitanga, ki te pōtōtara o kaupapa. E ngā manohiri ngō ngā hoe whā, e ngā manohiri tuarangi e, nau mai, hara mai, akato mai. Ka nui te koa, me te haere, ki te kite ia koutou, i tēnei rā. E mihi ana hou ki te kaupapa haka hira o tēnei rā. Ki te momaharatanga, ki tō tātou rangatira, a John. E tino nui te honora ki a hou, ki te tū ke mua ia koutou. Tēnā koutou e hoa mā. Araho mai, e aku tono ana hou i te rau Māori. O tira, e tika ana, kia mihi atu, kia mihi mai. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. He waiata tō toko whānau, and I'm hoping there's a few people in the room that can sing along with me here. Ko tahi kapua i te rangi, he maringai ki te whenua. Ko tahi kapua i te rangi, he maringai ki te whenua. Kua whiti te rā ki tua o ka hurangi, e kore koe e ngaro, toku reo rangatira, toku reo rangatira. E ai ki a po tātou te wherewhero, te kingi Māori tuatahi. Ko tahi te kowhao o te nira, e kuhana ai, te mero mā, te mero pango, me te mero whero. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora mai tātou katoa. I chose that proverb, that whakatoaki, ngō te wherowhero, and it reads, the needle has but one eye, and through that eye passes the white thread, the black thread, and the red thread. And that really speaks to me of John's life, the people, the culture, the joy, the friendship that went through the eye of that needle, which bound us all together. Everybody in the room here today will have a story, an anecdote that is really meaningful to them. We have got a massive taumata here today. I think the bill there's probably more acts on the bill than Woodstock, so we will be brief today, but there are a few things to say and to acknowledge. My name is Hamish Coney. I have known John for about 22 years, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from those that have known John even longer. Family, of course, friends that go back in some cases right back to John's student days. So I'm really looking forward to hearing a little bit more about that. My personal relationship with John is something that it's a great honor for me to be able to stand before you today to acknowledge. John was a unique person who was somebody who built relationships around shared interests. Now, I could stand here all day talking about our shared interests, but the two that I think were most meaningful for both him and myself were our love of Rotorua and kia ora the Rotorua contingent here today. I can see a few of you there, out there in the audience. Kia ora, e te whānau. It's lovely to see you here. John absolutely loved Rotorua. It was a central part of his life. He never really left Rotorua. He talked about it endlessly, and we had some wonderful conversations about what a locus of culture Rotorua was and remains to this day. The other great love that we shared was a love of Te Ao Skun. Now, of course, John knew Te Ao Skun, and so I absolutely love to hear his anecdotes about Te Ao Skun. And amongst the many acts of John's within the culture, one of the most important ones in my view was John's intervention in the early 1980s to cajole Te Ao back to New Zealand for that decisive exhibition at the Rotorua Art Gallery in about 1983, I think it was. And a couple of years ago, I chaired a panel discussion down at the City Gallery for the recent Te Ao Skun retrospective. And John was one of a number of speakers in that weekend. Others included Mark Adams, Megan Tamati Quinnell, Justine Olsen, and many others. And this was a really, really big moment for John. His health by that stage, this is September 2019, was starting to become a little bit frail, and he was a bit shaky, and I hovered, I guess, because I was very worried. This was a really big moment for him to be able to acknowledge his friendship and his love of Te Ao Skun and his appreciation of Skun's role in our culture. So I think John was speaking at the end of the second day. There'd been plenty of speakers, and John was nervous. This was a really big moment for him. So because John was nervous, I was nervous too. But I needn't have worried because John was in his element. Show and tell is one of the things that John did best. And talking about his relationship with Skun, time in Rotorua, and the 3 C's, Camel cigarettes, Coca-Cola, and crock pots, for which John was sent out by Te Ao to fetch baked beans, and even the odd quarter pounder from McDonald's that apparently Te Ao took a real shine to. But you could have heard a pin drop when John fished out one of Te Ao Skun's original lino cut blocks, which he had in that kite right there. I've got it here. There was a great crowd there that day, and John pulled out one of these. For him, one of the sacred tablets of New Zealand art. And that for me was a very, very happy memory, because I could see how happy John was, and John spent a lot of time making sure that other people were happy. And so that was a really wonderful moment for me to kind of ensure that he was happy. And we had a wonderful day together. I haven't got too much more to add, but one thing I would like to do is acknowledge Jay Esser. I know that Jay will be speaking later on today, but this event today would not take place without Jay's hard work, his vision for this event that we're going to enjoy today. So kia ora ki a koe, Joe, mo tō rangatira mahi, for your leadership. I know that in his final years, where are you, Jay? I know that in his final years, John very much appreciated his friendship with you, Jay, and the care that you took for him, and the joy that he experienced with you. So thank you very much indeed. The final word from my portion really has to go to John. In 2018, as one of my final acts as Managing Director of Art and Object, I worked with John to put together a catalogue, and we argued over the name of the title of the catalogue, but of course he won, and it was called Collecting Gold, Collecting Dust. It was another one of those little bon mots, those little aphorisms that John enjoyed so much. And so I was making regular pilgrimages up to Helensville, to the filtration station, as I've heard him refer to it recently. And the purpose of this particular catalogue was pretty simple, was to raise some money for John to have his Grand Tour, his GT. And I used to go up there on a regular basis and try and wrestle things from John's grip. And every now and then I'd walk out with 3 or 4 good things, and I'd say to him, "That's a trip to Paris, John," or "That's a trip to Venice," or "Yes, I want those 5 Te Ao Skun photographs because that'll get you to Egypt." And so we had a lot of fun putting that catalogue together. And in that catalogue, I did an interview with John. I tried to explain to him that a 40-minute interview would cover 6 pages and take me roughly 6 hours to transcribe. So 3 hours later, I let it run. But one of the statements that he made in that interview, I think, is really John to a T. And I'm going to read it to you now. I feel like I'm running an orphanage in the sense that many of the works I've collected, other people haven't seen their merit or authority. Collecting is a blessing and a curse. I've got a bit of an overdose of the collector's gene. I've had this burden, but it is a beautiful burden, and I have no regrets. Thank you.
I'd now like to invite Felicity West up to share some words.
Oh, you could come and stand behind, then it'd be good. Well, I'm not a collector. I'm a gardener and a cook and a grandmother and a partner and I said mother. The first thing that I wanted to say was my name is Felicity Patience West. And if anyone writes anything about John, they need to get the facts straight. I am not, what is that, Victoria. I'm Felicity Patience West. Okay, I will be brief as I am aware that there are many here that want to speak about John as the collector. Firstly, I need to thank anyone that has supported John's 3 sons in a positive way at this time. They need it, as the monumental task that is their legacy is beyond description. It is quite cruel. Yes, John was a brilliant collector and also an obsessive hoarder. I know, I lived with him for many years. Someone asked me if John was religious. My reply was no. However, he had a great love for the tangible object, not the invisible. I first met John in 1962. At that time, he was still living at home with his mother and stepfather. I witnessed the very, very beginning of John's puzzling and collecting. John was not allowed to have things, found objects, in his bedroom. So he moved out of the family home in 1963, and that was the beginning. I say to you all, go home and make your will clear, clean, and fair. John would vanish. I wouldn't know where he was, returning hours later with stuff he had found. I first met him at Elam, married in 1964. The first son, Jacob, born in 1965. Second son, Jerome, born in 1970. We separated in 1975, divorced in 1978. John's third son, Tim, with Jenny Blower, was born 1980. Jenny Blower has become over the years a very close and dear friend, even though she lives far away in France. A fragmented family, but still a family. 3 sons and 5 grandchildren. I went to check Facebook messages just before leaving Helensville to come here. A message from Jenny Blower for John. I forgive you for not being who I wanted you to be, but thanks anyway for my wonderful Timothy Francis, who was a beautiful being, loved son and friend, Jenny Blower.
Thank you, Felicity. Mark Perry is now going to share some words with us. Kia ora, Mark.
Wouldn't mind, actually. Not used to microphones. Howdy, howdy, howdy. G'day, g'day, g'day. Heidi hi, if you know what I mean. John Isms, miss him. Yeah, I'm John's brother, or half-brother. Same father, different mums. I'll try and keep this brief, but as you know, it's not a Perry trait. So buckle in. John and I didn't know each other, well, we didn't know each other existed until strange circumstances. Our father, Francis Chaldecott Perry, died in the mid-70s, but that's another story. In fact, as you know, most families have stories, baggage. Well, the Perry family have a container ship. So before I carry on, are there any other offspring from Francis Perry here by chance? Okay, back to the countdown. John and I both claimed, as you probably know, we were only children, which was great. Always got the sympathy vote. You know, everyone's, oh, poor you, only child. But we had all the food in the house, no worries about fighting for seconds. And I first knew of John's existence when I was doing my OE, well, coming back from my OE via India, and our father was living in Perth in Western Australia. So I thought, well, I wanted to reconnect with him because I left, my mum and I left Francis, back in when I was about 4 or 5, living in Perth. He was still there. So I flew into Perth and had an emotional reconnection, as you can imagine. But that's another story. In fact, that's another container. Let's move on. Anyway, while I was there, Frank said to me, he said, you know, you have a brother in Auckland. He's a school teacher. I go, oh yeah, school teacher. My image of a school teacher was like my days back in Tauranga Boys College. You know, the walk shorts and the socks and homespun cardigan, and very straight. Well, wasn't I surprised? So I came home, and then not long after that, Frank rang up and said, look, I'm coming to New Zealand with a business colleague, and we've got this idea. We're going to build something in the Waikato around horses. He loved his horses. So here was this entrepreneurial scam that was being blossomed, or scheme. No, as I was, scam. And he was going to be in the Waikato, Frank this is, and he turned up at our house, and he didn't stay long. The scheme fell over, and Frank moved on, as he had done before. Well, not long after that, I got a note from my mother, and it was actually a clipping out of the Herald saying that Frank had died. Our father had died, my father, John's father. I didn't think anything of it, but then I got a phone call a few months later, and there was on the phone, there was this voice, hi, John Perry here, I'm your brother. Like to know if I could pop in. This is about 10 o'clock at night in Hamilton. John turned up on his Vespa motor scooter and opened the door, and it was like looking in the mirror. I know what you're thinking. But back then in the 70s, I had long hair and a beard, just like John. And John definitely wasn't straight. So he came in and we chatted about the demise of Frank, and we talked about the pluses and minuses of being an only child, and we were quite surprised that we weren't only children then. And we talked about our common interests in music. He was, being older than me, about 7 years older. He was more rock and roll, I was more rock. But we had common interests with Chuck Berry and Johnny Cash and, of course, Bob Dylan. So John left and we carried on, and over the time, John turned up in our lives like it did in probably yours, just various places wherever we were living, whether it be Tiawanga and Hawke's Bay, or Christchurch, or Auckland, or Hamilton, or where we are now up at Te Arai, up north. And it was always pop in, pop out, and our kids, who are now adults, used to say, he's like a leprechaun, he just turns up. And that was John. And he used to say, I'm a kind of on the spur of the moment kind of guy. Anyway, at one point, with that big, deep voice of John's, I always had this vision that he might like to enter my world in commercial radio. Could you imagine a program director sort of allowing John to waffle on longer than 2 minutes after playing a song? I don't think so. We did have the opportunity, though, at one point to enter John's world, which was really exciting for us. He was director of the Rotorua Art Gallery at the time. This is back in the 80s. We were living in Christchurch, and John rang up and said, look, there's this important art auction. I'd like you to attend and act by proxy for me and purchase these works of art. And there's quite a lot. I'll send you on the catalogue. I'll tick the ones on the catalogue, and I'll also have the prices. So, you know, just you've got your limits. And there'll be a few odds and ends and extras too, if you're lucky. Well, we said, okay. Not having been to an auction before, far less an art auction, I knew more about the rock band AC/DC's Angus Young than I did about Rita Angus. So, with John's guidance, though, we went along to the art gallery, and there was all the hoi polloi of the Canterbury art scene there, and we started bidding, and of course did the old, you know, however they do. We managed to land a few works of art when the hammer came down, and all these strange looks from these people. Who the... I don't know those people, do you? Sorry, Jeremy. I don't think they went to our school. I think that's the chap from the radio station. I don't know. I don't listen to commercial radio. Anyway, we managed to score all the pieces of art that John wanted, and the others as well. And he was so impressed that he said we could choose 3 or 4 pieces, and those 3 or 4 pieces are in our house now. And on the back is John's beautiful handwriting, his calligraphy, which I still admire to this day, and we're very, very proud to have that in our house. So if you've got anything of John's, keep it. So this is the sad thing. Everyone says when someone close to you goes, or when anybody goes that you know, rather suddenly you think, well, that was good. I mean, he didn't suffer. There was not a long, drawn-out illness. But sadly, I don't know about you, but I have regrets that I didn't quite have the time to say to John how important he was in my life. And a friend of mine said to me, you know, siblings are inexplicable, inexcusable, and inextricably part of us. And now with John gone, I feel a part of me has gone as well. So John, as he used to say to us when we said goodbye often, that line from Grandmaster Flash, which I used on many a radio show when I said goodbye, take it easy. It's a jungle out there. Namaste, brother.
Thank you so much, Mark. I'd now like to invite John's sons, Jacob, Jerome, and Tim, up to say a few words.
This is all new kind of territory for us. We've never had anything like this happen before. I'd like to thank Webbs and Jay and Renee and Katie for doing this for us. It's taken a lot of stress off us. We've been dealing with bodies and remains and where we go next with all this sort of stuff. I can only speak for myself, but my relationship with my father was estranged. He didn't acknowledge my children, his grandchildren, which really hurt me. But you know, there's a lot of people in this room that have supported me, and you know, being my elders and men folk in this room that have been my male role models. Thank you all for that. These He's left a bit of a schmozzle for us, to say the least. Yeah, I'd just really like to say thank you to everyone for being part of this. Thanks.
Okay. Hello. Yeah, apart from the thanks, I want to impart to everybody who's been really instrumental in putting this together. It's been a real sort of weight off our shoulders. There's a lot going on. Just a couple of things. I'm a reasonably recent addition to New Zealand, so just catch you up on a few little anecdotes that I had about JP. I was too young to remember him in my early years. My childhood experience of him was a few old photographs. There might be some around, and these are parcels that would arrive on my birthday, kind of crazy assemblages of stuff on my birthday, near my birthday. I remember the amazing calligraphy, handwriting, and just matchbox covers, watching sharks and stuff like that. It's kind of amazing trinkets. Some of which I still have to this day. But I also my experience of him sort of been shaped by my mum's stories of him, which were always really positive. She obviously had an experience with him, but she never really laid that on me, so to speak. So I just got these amazing stories about these adventures that they used to have in the 70s. So the upcycling of Blackstump Cottage and these kind of dawn raids on the local tip to some of the stuff that's around here, and carrying a church pew on the back of a Vespa and all this kind of stuff. And my mind was pretty blown by the story of this guy, and also his righteous cheese on toast, which you guys may or may not have enjoyed as well. It was 28 years when I eventually made it back to Helensville and reconnected with him, and it was there he was. He was exactly the same as I'd imagined, and pretty instantaneously. All this, whatever this is, I was pretty hooked. So I lived there for a bit, and we used to hang out. The auction scene. We used to do the morning trips to the flea markets, road trips backwards and forwards to Rotorua with bootloads of goodies. He rocked up at my work once and made me a white bait fritter out of the back of his van, which is great. And we used to loads and loads in common, hanging out down at the back of the cinema. We once spent the whole weekend printing T-shirts and listening to the blues, which was really good memories for me. But I've been sort of reflecting a little bit since the last couple of weeks, and the shared enthusiasms and stuff that we had. I guess we were just geared quite differently. So he had an extra gear than me. I like a little downtime every now and again, whereas he would just keep going until he dropped. But I just sort of reflecting about that. I wonder about that downtime, whether if he sort of really knew sort of how to do it, or whether he even could ever stop, really. And I just wondered if he was maybe a tiny bit worried about what he would find if he did. He used to quote Bob Dylan lyrics reasonably often. And one of the favourites was he had I've got a head full of ideas that are driving me insane. Was one of his ones. And yeah, I just hope that he's found some peace. That's it.
Kia ora, welcome. Thank you all very much for coming. There's many faces that I see here today that I know that were Dad's old close friends from way back, so thank you all very much for coming. My world's been rocked quite heavily in the last couple of weeks. Not too sure what's going on or where I'm going. One thing Dad did do for us, which was fucking massive, was he took us into the bush and he taught us fucking heaps of stuff about the trees and the birds and lots of great things about New Zealand, which I'm very thankful for. I have some very good memories of my father, but also a couple of shit ones, and I'm just being honest. He left us with a bit of a shit sandwich to deal with as well. I know that he was huge in the art world, and we have to hand them over to you guys for part of that, for you to say your thanks and your memories and all sorts of things. But at this time I really want to be by myself in the bush with my father, and it's been quite a fucking difficult time for me, a very private time. I've had to make this very public, and I've struggled with a bit of that, and I just thank you all very much for coming here today. And I know that there'll be people coming forward with lots of great stories and things to share, so thank you kindly. And John used to have lots of little sayings, and say some strange things on the odd occasion. One of them I remember strongly was whenever he saw the police, he would just say, just act normal, just act normal. So I don't know what he was up to, but I found out that he has and was a bit light-fingered. And he showed us and used to say things like, you haven't got any of that Maori pajama, have you? Which I think was the marijuana. And back in the day it was pretty free, and he used to get us to pass it around. So a little bit of a thing, unfortunately, Dad, is yes, I do smoke weed and I do like it, and I've now called it Pounamu. There's a little bit of greenstone. Love you, I miss you heaps. Yeah. You're in my thoughts always, you old bucket. I miss you already, you fucking stupid prick.
Just on a little side note, Steve Chadwick, I believe these museum and art gallery signs are from the bathhouse if you need to claim them back. Thank you.
And I would actually like to ask the Honourable Steve Chadwick to come up and share some words.
Tēnā tātou katoa, nā mihi nui ki a koutou. Hei toi whakairo, hei mana tangata. Where there is artistic expression, there is human dignity. And thanks, boys, for sharing that bit of both of your parents. That's real, that's genuine, and we needed to hear that. Thanks to the organisers today for this very special service. John's death threw us all into where should we have the memorial service for John. And this is so appropriate, and the Helensville Museum certainly would have accommodated these numbers. But we're holding our own service in Rotorua in Te Runanga Tea Rooms that John was part of the restoration, and that will be on June the 30th. It's very small, so if you all want to come to Rotorua, we'll spill out into the gardens if it's a lovely day, right in front of Te Whare Taonga, or Te Arawa that he so dearly loved. With such an amazing lineup of speakers, I'm going to leave John's impact on the arts in New Zealand to those that really do know of his contribution with much more accuracy and elan than I. We were introduced first to John through my brother Dick, and I found the exotic world of Bohemia and creatives so much more appealing than my prosaic world. In 1968, when we were married, John met us at the Picton Ferry terminal on our wedding night, and Dick and Jude were with us. I'm not sure why you crashed our wedding night. He met us in a Model T Ford, took us to the Railway Hotel, and then whisked you two off on one of your art adventures. We were not part of that. We then met Vicky and John when we were all young parents together, and our lives crossed on many occasions, usually at the wonderful Barry-led art gallery openings, fantastic openings, or at Dick's famous Boxing Day parties. The kids, my kids, remember Jacob and Jerome and Tim. It's amazing to see you here because I was a midwife when the day you were born. So it's very special to see you here. My heart goes with you, and your father picked flowers from the council gardens and brought them up with a little droopy bunch of flowers, but we were all very proud of your birth. My kids remember the halcyon days of camping at Parkery. Vicky, I think you must have done most of the camping because I never saw John around then. It was tenting, I don't think was his thing. My Tani, who's now dead, John, could chew the fat with anybody. And these two souls connected on some cerebral level that I never ever attempted to fathom. Well, here's the trick. John became his lawyer. I seem to be a bit caught up in all of this at the moment. And that cemented many delightful encounters in Rotorua on each visit. Sometimes over a meal, sometimes at the art gallery, sometimes out on one of those fabulous art trips that those from our museum remembered. And so we've been connected over the last 40 years. We followed his many twists and turns romantically, and were also involved when he and Jenny Blower had Tim Rotorua. I don't believe John ever paid for my husband's services, but that corridor, the odd art bargain that's turned into a real treasure, I'm told, one steel slide guitar, and a few Elvis pizza boxes inspired by the Elvis in Geyserland exhibition, they kept us going, and we didn't care. John was appointed as the director of the Rotorua Art Gallery in 1978, and he survived till 1997. Roger Steele, the publisher, was the chair of the Cultural Services Committee, who recommended that council support this amazing appointment. John was a colourful and eccentric director, not particularly focused on financial prudence, but with a great passion for the arts. He had a clear understanding of the value of acquisitions, along with provenance that fitted our story and the story of Te Arawa, and he started a historic and also contemporary art collection that rocked the conservative world of Rotorua. It's lovely to have Paul Easton Lynn here today, and Paula, who was a director of the museum, and many who have a past link with the museum. They valued art, they valued John and what he brought into Rotorua. He built on his years of puzzling, and I understand my brother's going to speak about that, and he started to collect ephemera that was put to use. He roamed Motutara, Sulphur Point, for artefact that was artfully constructed into all sorts of curious works, Tim. One councillor recalls John coming to a committee of council to convince elected members to purchase a wooden ladder with objet d'art sort of all tied to the ladder. That never made the purchase cut, but Ralph Hortedy did, and has been valued ever since, along with so many other very, very clever acquisitions. He made sure to buy within his level of accountability to avoid ever having to appear before elected politicians again. The friends of the gallery absolutely loved him and his manaakitanga. The koiki, the committee of elders, were enchanted by him. Visiting artists loved his bespoke tours of rock art, geothermal, marae, and those wonderful mystery art tours that we all went on. He resonated with the art world and was dearly loved, but not very valued by the then council, who determined that a more corporate approach to museum management was the way forward. And that's when we lost our treasure in Rotorua. However, Paul East was on the Rotorua Energy Art Trust, and he valued John's acquisition skills, and they kept him on as their advisor, and our city is the better off, and I'm sure Parliament as well, because John was then on the Parliamentary Art Committee and then I was, and John was constantly advising us what to buy for Parliament. He loved buying with other people's money. His last visit to council summed John up to me, and it was only a couple of months ago. He drove to see the council lawyer in an attempt to intervene on the sale of his beloved Teo Schoon on the open market. He slept in his minivan outside our collections office, and then he came to me for a cup of tea and asked if he could have a shower in the mayor's shower, which of course he could. My staff were used to what we called the incidental visitor, in his beret and his kerchief. Thank you, John, for your passion, your knowledge, and your absolute love of our place. Moi mai e te rangatira.
Thank you, Steve. I'd now like to invite Renee Kim, to share a few words, and I'm going to start this over here.
Hi. If you don't mind, I just prepare some notes. Just read. Knowing my relationship with John, I might need more than 100 minutes to talk. Yeah, okay, thank you. But as Hamish says, I will keep it brief with my broken English. But don't complain in my English because I learned English from JP. So you complain, John. One of the things I remember him saying to me from early days is, pardon? When I say something, he always say, pardon? Pardon, Renee? Pardon? And yes, because he couldn't understand what I was saying. But fast forward, he became one of the only person who can deeply understand me as a person. I would like to share some photos that I chose from my iPhone or old memory card. We have some common pages. The one of the biggest, same commonly favorite thing is toys. That's why I loved John for the beginning of the period. I have been collecting some teen toys before I met John. I've got some number of very good, rusty and good toys. I discovered John is by me. It was about 12 years ago. I lived in Hamilton for 10 years and I moved out Auckland. and I settled Hauraki Corner, and I opened my little shop in Lake Road. I wanted to travel in the south and west and some outside of the Auckland by myself. One day, I lost way in nearby Kumio because I knew there, I didn't know about that area. And I just lost and I went round and I found some little town, it was Helensburgh. I tried to find a good cafe to get the flat white extra hot, but I couldn't get the right proper cafe there. And then I just gave up to get some good coffee, and I just drove down the street. I found a beautiful Art Deco building. That was my highlight at that time. That was almost 12 years ago. The shop, that time, the Jones shop is beside the building. It's very dark and damp and very dark. My first impression was dark. When I get inside, there was a man, there's a beard. It looks very spooky. And his voice is very like howling, like that voice. I asked several things. How much is this one? And he didn't answer. I said, excuse me, I want to buy your teapot. How much is this one? And blue china? He says, there is no prices. There are lots of stuff, but there's no prices. I bought 7 items from the Jones. And I always bring my camera, Canon camera. I asked John, if you don't mind, can I take a photo of me, just only one shot? He said, sorry? My photo? Yes. Why? Because you look great. Sorry? He wasn't very nice to me for the first time, but I took a photo. Maybe the photo is, that one is, we work in the late night in the cinema, the screen printing, and I took most of the photos. It's hard to show me that photo. That is my first photo of John. Yeah. And so this is only, he says, only one photo. Thank you. And then I didn't pick several items, and then I just back home. John got my 2 items because I paid. He didn't have efforts. I couldn't use my credit card, only cash. He says only cash. All right. Since then, we met. We've been many places. We traveled a lot. Especially I like his old van. There are lots of stories, never-ending story. You might be shocked. If I say, you might be shocked. Because you know John more than me, but you don't know John more than me. Exactly. John, he's an amazing guy. He changes my life, that's true. But one thing you must know, he's very tight about money. How much tighter? I told you sometimes, and Jerome and team and they. I'm a coffee addict. We go to the cafe. Mostly money pays from my pocket. He's got a very deep and long pocket. When we go overseas, we just go somewhere, He would love to pay artwork for me. How much doesn't matter. He would love to pay for me. But he never paid for the restaurant, cafe. I paid. John is amazing. I have to say, he always tried his best to support me by introducing me to his fellow friends. And as I was always beside him, I had the privilege to meet and become close with the different artists and other influential people around John. If John was here right now, he would tell you guys hey, this is my dear friend Renee. To me, John was someone who I could reach and get to no matter whatever, whenever I could. These past weeks have not been very great for me, rather difficult. And yes, it is still hard accepting this. I still think this isn't real. And I also know it will take a little longer to fully go by this. I have always remembered his birthday every year. My last birthday visit to John was on his 78th birthday, not too long ago. And we watched it till school documentary with Jeff Thompson. I remember clearly John's eyes watering while watching it as usual. He cries a lot. He's crybaby. 2 weeks before he passed away, we were supposed to meet up in Takapuna, Hashmere Road, but he was late. Once again, as always. He's usually about 15 or 20 minutes late, but this time was more than 1 hour late. I was worried about it. Later on, I could see him working toward me from the distance, and he looked very fragile, not normal, such a fragile. People sometimes say that they know when their time is up. John asked me that day. He wanted to go for a drive around the town. And I say, yes, I'll drive. And I drive past the bridge to the Joyce Road and Richmond Road and Ponsonby and Webb's Art and Object, International Art Gallery, Auckland Museum, and the last is Auckland City Gallery. It was heavy traffic. I couldn't car park. My car is in a big one. So I said, John, shall we back to shore, to your car? There was around 4 o'clock. He says, if you can, shall you just drive a little bit more longer? It was very unusual for him to ask me such things, and his behavior wasn't really what I was used to. Something was a little different that day. His last word was, see you on your birthday in June, dear Flo Dolly. He always say to me, Flo Dolly. Only if I could have known that was the very last moment of us seeing each other. Everybody has regrets in their life. And one of the regrets I have it, all the 7 text messages he sent me on WhatsApp before he left, that I completely missed it. If I could see them, if only I could be react to them, made me think a lot. My outfit that you guys are seeing right now, from top to bottom, the blazer, the vest, is actually John's. I have tuned them to better fit me. And I'm sure if he was watching this, he would appreciate it very much. I want to say one more thing. Jacob, Jerome, and Timothy. One day night, he rang me. That's very unusual. He never rang me at midnight. He always texts me. We communicate with a text message. I brought his first mobile phone and the laptop from Renee. He said, he was very upsetting. I said, John, can you talk tomorrow morning? He says, I want to say one thing. I failed. Sorry? I failed. Failed what? I failed being good dad, good father. I know. You always told me. But Jacob, my son, he's in town. He told me, Jacob, my son, he's in town. He was very upsetting. If he's complaining to you guys, 3 boys, that is he is still loving you. That's it. If they don't have love, they never complain. They never jealous. They never grumpy. Your father always grumpy to me when I say about my 2 boys. So I would not say about my 2 sons to JP. He always being grumpy. He loved you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd now like to invite Richard Wolfe up to say a few words. Kia ora, Richard. And Richard came in and hung this wall earlier this week, didn't you? You did? Yeah, it looks great.
Afternoon, everybody. I had 1 or 2 anecdotes about John lined up, but one of the previous speakers reminded me of something else. The white-baked fritters, we too were treated to those, cooked in the van outside the gate and delivered to the door by John. As previously mentioned, John was appointed to the directorship of the Rotorua Art Gallery and Museum in 1978, and it was around that time that I joined the staff of the Auckland Museum. So we were sort of inducted into the museological sector around the same time. And I very quickly became aware of this astonishing and remarkable series of innovative and imaginatively titled exhibitions that emanated from that museum. I hope someone has documented them all. I can remember some of the titles. Yeah, well, I think I can. Misadventures in Kiwi Land, Homage to the Handmade and Humble, there's one about birds, Feathers and Fibre, and many others. Not Bad, the travelling exhibition, and I guess the greatest of all was Elvis in Geyserland. I mean, who else but John could have come up with a title like that? These are all products of his very fertile imagination. He had an expansive vision, I would say panoptic possibly, and I'm not sure, but I suggest that he's probably one of the most original, if not the most original people that many of us have had the pleasure of knowing. There are a number of projects that he sort of got me involved with, and one of them, one of his big, unfortunately unrealised projects was an exhibition on the Kari tree. The idea that we'd have a major exhibition that celebrated how that majestic tree was represented by artists and how the tree itself contributed to the history and the social fabric of New Zealand. John and I together made a personal deputation to several of our leading institutions, and we did receive a fairly sympathetic hearing, but in the end I think logistically it was just too difficult a job to manage. The idea of having all these images and items relating to the Kari under one roof, which is what we wanted, was probably just too difficult. However, John certainly didn't let the idea die, and late last year he discovered there must have been a bit of a gap in the program at North Art on the North Shore, and so he suggested that we could do a very small Kari exhibition over there. So that's what we did. I think I had 2 or 3 days notice, so I filled the car with a few Kari items that I had, and John of course had no shortage of such material. So we turned up at North Art. Unfortunately, John was not in great shape, so I had to do all the heavy lifting. So it was my job to hang the exhibition. I'd be hanging the John directed operations from a chair. He was sitting down and I was sort of holding things up and he'd say, oh, just a bit to the left, down a little bit. And I thought, well, bloody hell, I've been doing this sort of thing for 50 years. But anyway, it was a good exercise in humility from me to take directions from the master. And I hope he approves of the little hang I did over there of some of the items of his that friends and others have brought in. One other interesting exhibition that John was very involved with was 1995, the centennial exhibition celebrating the visit to this country of Paul Gauguin. You may recall shortly after that period, a number of items appeared on the local scene which purportedly were by the great French artist himself. And of course, they patently weren't. It was bogus and it was all revealed as a fraud, and most of us probably dismissed it, but John didn't. He was incensed. He managed to convince TVNZ that he could have a little spot, I think on the 6 o'clock news or the program that followed that, to sort of show how easy it was to misrepresent an artist. From his vast collection in the Regent Theatre, he had a few sort of folky items that could be arguably used to sort of suggest that they were very early works by Gauguin, and a few other items that were apparently sort of said to relate to this to the artist. Anyway, late one afternoon I got a phone call from John. He says, look, I'm just leaving Helensville shortly and I've got a slot at, I'm booked in at TVNZ. So look, in about 3/4 of an hour, I'll call into your place. Have you got anything that I can use to support my case? And I said, well, I don't know. So anyway, I got going and I thought, well, I'll produce Paul Gauguin's visiting card, business card, that seemed to be maybe contribute to it. So I produced a number of these small cards. I found some antique paper to print them on, and I had Paul Gauguin, and in French, of course, artist and Pacific adventurer, and his address was P.O. Box 2, Papeete, Tahiti. And so John called in, and I gave them to John. It was the last I saw of them. I didn't even keep one. But apparently after the TV program was filmed, as John's spot, he handed these cards out to the technicians, and I've never seen them again. So, but anyway, if they turn up at auction, you'll know who to blame. One of my most memorable memories of John is about, I think, exactly 10 years ago. John and Renee visited England. It was John's second only visit to the UK. Pam and I happened to be there, and John got in touch and says, look, can we have a field trip in East London? So I said, well, yes. So we arranged to meet. We met at Liverpool Street Station and then struck out to the east across Spitalfields, and of course it was a pretty, how should I say, hot area at that time. Gilbert and George and the Chapman brothers and Tracy Emin and all manner of other artists were, that was their neighbourhood. Anyway, we walked through Spitalfields and got to Brick Lane and walked up Brick Lane, and then somewhere at some point suddenly John stopped and turned around, and he sort of radiated enthusiasm and excitement, and I believe there were tears in his eyes, and he says, I can't believe it, I'm in the middle of the universe. He was so happy to be there. Any of you that have visited the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford would know it's John's sort of place. So we suggested, well, look, you can't come to the UK without going there. So he did, enjoyed it. I believe he made about 3 visits and enthused over it and sent us a postcard saying, look, wonderful. I suppose I'm a little bit of a collector, and I'm often being told that, a museum like the Pitt Rivers is a salutary experience of where it can lead up, you end up with all this stuff. I don't know what sort of impact it had on John. I'm sure it just vindicated his enthusiasm for collecting things. And anyway, he had a theatre in Helensville to fill. Anyway, I understand he thoroughly enjoyed that experience. So finally, we already miss those unannounced visits, knock on the door from John, calling in and inviting us out to his van to see his latest treasures, peeling back the blankets and the objects to see what he had recently acquired. Also, I'm reminded about Blue, John's dog, who used to accompany John when he wanted to obviously be first in at a flea market in the morning, so he'd park outside overnight and share the van with Blue. Sort of a bit of a variation on the name of the American rock group. John passed a one-dog night, as it were, or even better in his words, quoting Bob Dylan, he was tangled up in blue. And on that note, I mean, if you were paying attention before the formal proceedings, you would have heard there were lots of Bob Dylan songs, and John was a great fan, so I'd just like to finish on one. The chorus from a song that was on Dylan's an early, fairly recent album, Tempest, a song called Roll On John, which was about another John, obviously, but coincidentally one that went to art school, not Elam, but a Liverpool art school. Anyway, I hope I get this right. There are only 12 words, and they are shine your light, roll on John, you burn so bright. Oh, I'm sorry, look, I'll just check that. Got it written down here. Here we go. Shine your light, moving on, you burn so bright, roll on John. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And now I'd like to ask Jeff Thompson to come up and say a few words. Kia ora.
Hello everyone, my name is Jeff Thompson. I've known John since 1983, and I know a lot of you here have known him a lot longer than that. I should start off first of all saying there was a mention of some stolen or signs behind me from the bathhouse. We can add to that, and I know Steve, you may want to go and research it, but there is a forged number plate on the Mini, the corrugated ironclad Mini, in the collection of the bathhouse. John gave me my first ever public exhibition in the very early 90s, and he came up with the idea. He had 3 Minis, the 3 primary colours, and probably in the 80s you could have been forgiven to thinking that the what was the movie, the Italian Job. The Italian Job was being filmed in Rotorua with John's small fleet of Minis. But anyway, he came up with this idea of gifting the red Mini to the museum and letting me work on it for 2 weeks in the gallery, the hallowed halls of the bathhouse, which I did. I promptly chopped a lot of panels off it, put corrugated iron, slowly clad it, and that brings Blue into the picture as well, because I used to work at night there, and John would come and pick me up, and Blue would always be with him, and it was a ritual where they would spend 20 minutes going through the halls, John chasing Blue, and Blue would have the rubber doorstop from one of the doors, and they would have this, chasey game through the halls with vases and things all over the place, but I don't think they ever knocked anything over. I saw John the Wednesday before he passed, and I spent about an hour with him, and the reason I went and saw him was I took him a little drawing, a watercolour of the Stick Man from Pack and Save. I think that's the one. It was a commission, a proposal for a job, and I knew he would like it because I'd already given him a drawing I'd made for a commission I did of the 4 Square Man, and Dick, I'll talk to you about that a bit later. And he had framed the 4 Square Man, and he had it on his stairwell. He had little galleries everywhere, and he had his personal collection going up the stairs, and that's where the 4 Square Man was. And he was going to frame the Stick Man and put it on the stairwell, and of course that's never happened, and it's on his framing table. That's where it was found. So, but also to add to Richard's comments about some of the names of some of his exhibitions, the one he stumbled on was birds. It was birds of a feather, and for me, didn't create a nightmare, but John asked me if I could make him a tin chook for this birds of a feather, which led to hundreds of chooks over the years. And he came down to my studio in Taradale, which was right next door to the Black Power headquarters. There's a driveway between us. And he stood over me, because I hadn't finished it, for 3 hours while I finished this head-down chook, it was a head-up corrugated iron chook based on origami, because he wanted to take it back in his mini back for the exhibition, which he'd be down collecting. When I'd finished it, he put me in the mini. There was a front seat in it at that stage. He did take the front seat out on different occasions so he could fit more things in that he had collected. And we went over around Napier Hastings second-hand shops in Taradale, and what he was collecting was anything to do with mowers and kiwis, rubbers, rulers, pencil sharpeners, photographs, anything, tea towels, 50 cents, 20 cents he was paying for them. Now, 6 months later, I went and saw a show on the mower at the Auckland Museum, and there it was, the John Perry collection. Under glass, the big cabinet, and it looked fantastic, and with all these little objects that had sort of raised the level of them to put them into the museum like that. He made them seem important. He also, thinking of that, someone told me once, and I can't remember who it was, they found John on Ponsonby Road on his knees, going through his bag looking for a suitable pen or a piece of chalk, because he had found a piece of chewing gum squashed on the footpath which reminded him of the North Island. He was trying to write, "You are here." And that made me actually think that, you know, John put as much importance onto a little object like that, found left over, as he would to a Rembrandt painting. You know, he still had that same interest and enthusiasm for it. I have a few anecdotes of John's, the time I'd spent with him. We became neighbours 80 metres away from where we live in Helensville. So we used to see him most days. He used to love coming over and you know, sitting in the garden, and he used to hold court on our Wednesday coffee mornings until there was about 15 people every morning, and I decided I couldn't get much work done at all, so I had to stop that. And it was because John would start talking, and everyone was, of course, enthralled. John probably holds the record for driving between Taupo or Twin Creeks, which is on the Rotorua side, a hot creek and a warm creek. I went there with him one night, and we drove for 8 minutes with his lights off on the way back towards Rotorua, and he said, I always remember him saying, "This is the only place in the world where you can do this." There was a full moon, and 8 minutes we drove. His minis also, what's I say? I remember Neil Dawson telling me in the late 90s there was an exhibition. John, I'd been overseas and I came back and I saw Neil Dawson, and he said to me he'd been involved in an exhibition with John that had curated at the Bathhouse on New Zealand sculpture, and it had been promoted by John as being the biggest sculpture event of the year, the best and biggest show in New Zealand for that year. And Neil told me the whole time they were setting up, John had found a building that was being demolished, and he was collecting bricks. So he was backwards and forwards for 3 days with showing them all the bricks he had got before he took them off home. So, yeah. So another nice little story of John's is a friend of ours, sadly she passed a few years ago, Pam Zeppelin from the University of South Australia, and she used to lecture in art theory, and she was also at the College of Education there for a long time. Used to love coming to New Zealand. I introduced her to John at a dinner party at Warren and Perrett Visco's one evening, and I always remember that Pam was going down to Rotorua the following day, and John said to her, "Well, look, give me a ring because I'll give you a tour of the art world in Rotorua." So she gave him the number where she was staying at the motel. She got down there the next night and was unpacking. She hadn't been there long, and the phone rang, and it was John. And this was 6 o'clock at night, telling her he would pick her up in an hour. And she was starting to worry and wondering what's going on. You know, he duly came and picked her up, and what it was a tour of the art world in Rotorua, but it was a tour at night where they were crawling under hedges, hiding behind trees, climbing fences to look in people's windows at artwork. he was telling her all about the paintings on the wall and who had painted them, and sculptures in the gardens and things. And so anyway, she went back in due course. Of course, it was one of her highlights for her of her visit to New Zealand was this night tour, and all she could think of was if anyone saw them, they were going to be arrested as peeping Toms. And she said there were people sitting down having meals and washing dishes and things, watching television, but they weren't looking at people, they were looking at art on the walls. Yeah. He also had a great love of, there'd often be the tap, tap, tap on the window at 11 o'clock at night. And sure enough, and then a hand would wave and it was John. And what it would be, he had seen some pallets on the side of the road. And I would have to get my truck and put him in the passenger seat and drive down to Rosebank Road or Partiki Road and load up with all these pallets, which he would then bring back and we'd have to unload them, and I'd get home about 3 in the morning. I won't miss that, John. What happened another lovely thing is of course he was in heavens. It was just heaven for him, the inorganic rubbish collections. And on numerous occasions, we'd be out there in my truck at night in the dark. We would go to places where there weren't a lot of houses, but there was rubbish, and I'd be driving and he'd be running alongside the truck grabbing things and putting them onto the truck, and we had torches and headlights and things, and he truly enjoyed that. And he also used to do it with our worker Alan, who I know is here today. Alan remembers numerous times going out with John at night in his van, loading up stuff, bringing it home, dumping it, and then going out for a second time. So, yeah. The other thing John loved, of course, was he'd come and visit us and sit and have a coffee at night. And if we were watching television or a movie, or it would always be when something exciting was happening, the end of a series or documentary, and he would come in and talk. As soon as the advert came on, there was just this absolute silence, and he would just be fascinated by adverts. Which brings to mind also, I remember probably 2 years ago he gave a lecture at the museum in Helensville, and it certainly wouldn't have catered for all of us here. We'd all be outside. And the one thing he told them they should be collecting is, if it was artwork or craft, they should be buying contemporary stuff, because it's going to be the historical things in the future. And he finished off by saying that what everyone should be collecting is junk mail and saving it, because junk mail said a lot about our community, what we're doing at the moment, and that in 20 years' time that would become valuable. Yeah, but I'll probably finish there. Okay. Oh, there is one last thing I'd like to do. John collected many things, mostly art. We all know the crafts and the arts. He loved wire. He loved corrugated iron. I spent a trip in Europe quite a few years ago, and I came back with one of these, not this one, and I've been staying with Bill and Pip Colbert in Coin in Provence, and we had this wonderful 3 days, as probably quite a few of you here have also done, going around rubbish tips. And anyway, there was one rubbish tip where they burnt everything, and all that was left with glass, bronze, concrete, wire, steel. And the Colberts had about 30 of these. And I found one, and I was so excited, and I packed it up, and I treasured it, and I brought it back to New Zealand, back to Helensville. About 2 days later, John came over, saw it, went away, and came back 10 minutes later with this, because he had one in the theatre across the road, 80 metres away. Look, one last thing. I just brought a little magazine called Valley Voice, which is a really good author-writer in Helensville, Helen Martin, who wrote an article on John. It took 3 interviews. I'm not sure how many hours it was, but she wrote a really informative article on John. I just thought I'd just read a couple of things. Here we go. Of course, John lived upstairs in the theatre, and the upstairs was like his own, all his good things, a lot of his personal collection. Here we go. Downstairs, which John describes is like a railway station with things arriving and departing all the time, his studio is in one small part of what he happily calls the theatre of dust. The theatre auditorium, where the full extent of his extraordinary collection, the artefacts of art and culture, becomes apparent. I'm a dealer in endangered species, specialising in material culture from the global village. He tells me, I collect the outstanding, the extraordinary, and the unusual. I build collections, then release them. So he called his auditorium, the theatre out the back, the theatre of dust. And if anyone was lucky enough to get out there, it truly was. I don't envy the boys having to sort out what's there. I really don't. I'm envious of finding things in there, but I wouldn't like to be the one left trying to sort it all out. And on that note, look, I'd just like to acknowledge Felicity Patience West, and Tim and Jerome and Jacob, just for, I thought it was fabulous seeing them here today and listen to what they had to say. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Jeff. I'd now like to ask Dick Frizzell up to say a few words. Kia ora, Dick.
Ooh, this is a bit of a thing, isn't it? I'd like to, Jeff reminded me of something that I wasn't going to mention, that it came back, an uncanny ability of John's that he reminded me of, was this thing that John could do. Any piece of shit, on a shelf in a junk shop or whatever, John would touch it and pick it up, and it would turn into like an incredibly rare and valuable artifact just by the act of him touching it. You remember that? It was like all of a sudden everyone wanted this thing. But prior to that, nobody gave a shit about it. Now I'm going to go back to 1962, I think, or 61. I hope I'm not going to steal one of your stories, Murray. But it's we used to have these arts festivals where the different universities would take their turn to host the festival, be Dunedin University, Christchurch, or Auckland. And in this particular, I was in my second year at art school, I think, and we were hosting it. Christchurch was hosting it, and Auckland Art School, Elam, sent a crate full of paintings down to be part of the festival, to hang at this festival. And I remember going. The crate was in the sculpture department, big crate on the floor, and we were all gathered around to see what they were painting in Auckland. And we crowbarred off the top lid of this box, and the painting on the top, this big sort of shiny enamel painted thing, looked like a sliced boiled egg, just a bit of yellow and then a bit of white, like the hood of a racing car or something. And of course, us down at Ilam, we were still sort of back in 1913, with sort of the beginning of Cubism, with all our lecturers. It seemed to begin with Cubism and end with the Bauhaus. It was a very sort of old-fashioned, Bill Sutton with his vague sort of pastoral Cubism. And we looked at this thing, this painting, and I thought, what? What the fuck? Really? You're allowed to paint that at art school? It was really, we were gobsmacked at this thing. And of course it was John Perry. And I didn't know John at this point, and Murray and I were kind of, what, God, I can't wait to meet this guy, this John Perry. And sure enough, he came down, a little guy, that was surprising. And for some reason, I can't remember the full story, but Murray and John and me formed this little Three Musketeers thing straight off. We were just like, phew. It's like the very thing that Murray and I were kind of hanging in for, that sort of ray of sort of sunshine, that modernist kind of shot in the arm. It was just like, woohoo! And we used to, John and I used to reel around Auckland, half pistol all the time. There was no drugs in those days, except Benzedrine and stuff. And then I can't remember who started this, whose idea it was. It was John's, I think, to be honest, because he had this. John always seemed to know stuff that how do you think? He never seemed to read anything or whatever, but he would like Richard Hamilton and all these people I'd never heard of. He'd sort of come to light with this thing. Anyway, he came. We were walking down the road one day, the Three Musketeers, reeling from one event to the other, and John picks up this bit of paper out of the gutter. It was a bubblegum wrapper or something, and he read like a Minties wrapper, and he read off the message on the wrapper, like a poem, like a rapper. And then we started looking for everything we could find. We found whatever it was, theatre tickets. We started reading them, finding them, seeing who could find the most insane ready-made poem. That's what John called them, because of the Duchampian thing, which of course John knew all about, because he knew everything. So we're doing this ready-made poetry, and then we went to an event, a poetry reading, an actual poetry reading. This was funny, and this is the big thing of the story. And we were sitting and Bruno Lawrence was drumming, and all these poets are reading their poems about razor stropping in the darkest night of the soul and the blossom of the thing. It was all this stuff, and it wasn't too bad. And the Murray or John, and I can't remember, came back from the toilet with this slip of paper that came out that after when you took the last bit of toilet paper from the Jay's toilet paper pack, remember that awful shiny paper that just sort of smeared it around, and right when you took the last bit of toilet paper out, there was a little bit of paper that reminded you to go and buy some Jay's fluid. Anyway, John or Murray or John, wasn't me. I was in the audience. They came up, and the three of us, and they said, "Look, we've got to look at this," and I've got it, sort of. Look, we'll read it. And we went up on the stage, the three of us. I don't know how we pulled this off, and we said to we got Bruno Lawrence. I said, we don't have much. It was a bit like a instant sort of, people organising a sing-along. And so we got Bruno, and Murray and I and John Perry got up to the mic, and Bruno got going, and we read this thing. I can hardly do it. Jay's fluid cleaner, best and cheapest, a true germicide, a perfect purifier. Must be diluted with water as per instructions. And this is all Bruno's doing this stuff, we're all trying to be dramatic about it. 1 teaspoon to a quart, not to be taken. Jay's fluid cleaner cleans white round the bend. Cleans right round the bend. And of course it brought the house down, except the poets that organised this thing thought we were taking the piss. And they kicked us out. We're out on the footpath with our half-drunk bottles of beer, wondering what happened to us. And the next year, whenever the festival was organised, blow me down, the poets organised a special ready-made section of their special evening. But we weren't having a bar of that because it was ersatz, it wasn't sort of spontaneous. So that was meeting John Perry. Now I've got a very quick poozling story. When we came to Auckland, we all lived in St George's Bay Road together, and of course, Jude and I had Jude's mum's Mini, because she went and bought a new one. We got the old one, and so that I was co-opted I had to get a roof rack for this fucking thing, of course, And John would go off poozling, and the stories about that I could tell you, but there's one in particular that is my favourite story. John and I crept into this it's when they were clearing out the Newton Gully for the motorway, so there were all these houses, all these old villas all lined up being half demolished, and John was always, he'd get into these places before anyone else and grab all the curtain rings and everything else. And then we went in and into this house, and it was this water. John knew where everything would be hidden. You know what I mean? He was an expert. And he said, "Dick, there was this hot water cupboard, with the cupboard above it, the cupboard door." And he said, "Look, I'll get up bend down, and I'll get up on your shoulders." So I got up, and I'm standing like this in front of this hot water cylinder, and John's on my shoulders. He's got the cupboard, and he's handing down copper kettles and stone jars and brass candlesticks. And I'm putting them on the table like this, and they're all going through me. You know what I mean? Hand down, and then I'm looking ahead at the hot water cylinder, and on the top of the hot water cylinder was a plumber's mate, you know, the rubber thing with the wooden handle. And I thought, oh, well, I'll get that. So and when we came home, and Josh, because they were John's, they weren't mine, they were all John's, I think. And we got home and this big box full of all these brass candlesticks and everything else. And I said to Jude, oh, well, I got that. That was handy. It held up the plumber's mate. And John would sometimes give me an old copper kettle for letting me use the Mini or something, you know. This unusual man. Anyway, thank you, that's my lot.
I'd now like to ask Cyril Wright up to say a few words. Cyril?
Hi, I'm Cyril Wright, and today I'm representing myself and Jim Geddes from the Eastern Southland Gallery in Gore. When I first met John, he was the director of the Rotorua Art Museum, and I was on my way south, and we needed to pick up some artworks from his museum for the exhibition we were working on. We were running late, so I rang him, and he said, no worries, somebody will be here when you get here. I was very surprised when John himself was there as the director to open up the gallery and give us the works. This was extremely unusual for a director to wait for us. Anyway, once we were loaded and signed off the goods, he invited us in for a cup of tea and a discussion that followed. He explained to us the significance of the works of the gallery. Over the years, I got to know him better and had longer discussions with him about the works he was collecting. About a month ago, I was picking up some artworks from him that he had donated to the Eastern Southland Gallery. He said to me that he was selling up his collection. I said to him, well, if you find a mold for making candles, I'd be interested in buying one. He said, yes, I've got one upstairs. And I said, how much would you like for it? And he said, oh no, I don't want to sell it at the moment. I said, okay, fine. Makes me smile now, you know. I last saw John on Thursday a week ago when he had bought some works for me to take to Wellington. And he asked for a bit of time and a bit of space because he wanted to do some more packing. He originally told me he had about a cubit of material that he wanted me to help him take to Dunbar. He turned up with 3 cubic meters of material to go to Dunbar. That was his photographic exhibition. Anyway, and then I said goodbye to him. I came back after about an hour later and we discussed the possibility of him driving to Wellington because he got this idea that as I wasn't going to be going to Wellington for about a month, why don't he take a van? And so there was a few vans around where I was working and I showed him the vans and we discussed which one, you wouldn't need a very big one, he could do it. So he said, yeah, I think I'll drive to Wellington. It'll take me 3 days, but that's okay. And then I said goodbye to him, went upstairs and I researched possible vans for him to drive. I later sent him a text to him with details and he replied back, thanks for the information. So I was extremely surprised and sad when a couple of days later I was informed that John had died. I now will read a letter from Jim Geddes, director of the Eastern Art Gallery. John Perry. John visited Gore on several occasions and was very taken with the John Money and the Ralph Hotry collection held by the Eastern Southland Gallery. And he also took an interest in our wider collection. He quickly became a good friend and advisor and was a huge source of knowledge. He was part of the remarkable generation of artists, curators, curatorial staff who contributed a great deal to the cultural fabric of this country. We were privileged to have known him and were always a pleasure to welcome into our small town in Gore. In 2014, the gallery was approached by John to host an exhibition simply titled Paper and Ink and Paint and Clay. It featured 70 works from his personal collection. The works in the show were made up of, strangely enough, paper, ink, paint and clay. And his selection featured the works of some remarkable printmakers, painters and potters. Added to this mix was a John Perry hallmark, a cabinet of curiosities. He had a floor talk entitled Confessions of an Artaholic, and John focused almost entirely on the contents of that cabinet. The other works spoke for themselves. At the end of the talk, he announced that it was his 70th birthday, and the 70 works of this exhibition was his gift to the gallery. That's the Gore, and it's still in there, the Eastern Southland Gallery. It proved in the selection because he had carefully considered the gallery's permanent collection and identified some of the artists missing in action. He was also keen that the Southland had works from his beloved North Island, so the gallery print collection grew to include a Dick Vizzell, John Reynolds, Juliet Peter, Connie Lloyd, Trevor Lloyd. Potters, paintings and sculpture were also represented, so we're able to welcome works from Jeff Thompson, John Drawbridge, Paul Fisher and others. After that, we had a number of classic John moments. The phone would go and he would say, "How many Barry Priddles did I give you?" 2 would be the reply. "Well, you can't do much with those. I'll have another 8 or so here. Get Cyril to send them down." The 70th birthday present soon grew to 142 works. Our generous friend used to quip that it should be known as the John No Money Collection. This is because John Money, the sexologist, actually gave a huge collection to the Eastern Southland Gallery in Gore, which still is there. How could we think of his gift in financial terms? It's priceless. By virtue of his generosity, John has a continuing presence in pretty much every collection show we put together. Whatever the theme, he's there in spirit, and we vividly remember the detailed history of the work's creation, the quiet, one-to-one respectful conversations about the technique, the artistry, the historical context, the material used, and the probable tutor or mentor of the artist, the art school they went to and where he got it, and sometimes the price if that was appropriate. In recent weeks, our co-worker Rosemary came up from Gore to work with John in Helensville for a few days, cataloguing some of his extension folk art collection. This was a collection that we've got that's been donated to the Eastern Southland Gallery, and it will head down there later on. We hadn't met him before, but she emailed me back after the second day with him saying, "Thank you again, it's a brilliant adventure and an unforgettable opportunity to meet someone so remarkable." I can't believe the extent of John's interest and his willingness to share his knowledge. It's something I'm always going to remember. That was from Jim Geddes. And for myself, I feel that basically a tall kauri tree has fallen in the forest of the art world. Thank you.
Thank you, Cyril. I'd now like to ask Hannah Arnold to share some thoughts with us.
Hi everyone, I'm Hannah and I often worked with John in the region in Helensville. The first day I met John, he rolled into the Helensville Art Centre where I was working. We were both wearing berets, and when he saw me, his reaction was something that only the very privileged would have witnessed. As soon as he saw me, he did this. I nearly fell over backwards with surprise at seeing somebody he identified as a fellow soul and someone who is clearly, as he would put it, a little left of centre. That day, he invited me to work for him, and soon we were speeding along Old North Road in his van, John listening to Howling Wolf and Bob Dylan on the stereo, me hanging on and hoping this old guy that I just met still had his license. And so began a friendship and mentorship that I will always treasure. Working with John was both a pleasure and an exercise in patience and taking deep breaths. John was from another era, and he spent a lot of time on his own. His steady, measured, some would say slow, pace really taught me the value of slowing down, appreciating the things around you. He always appreciated the little things, especially the natural world. Ginkgo leaves, what the ducks in the park were doing, the beautiful pattern of foxing on a piece of paper pulled from an old picture frame together. "There's some righteous stuff in these boxes," he would say, followed by, "Have I shown you my suitcase full of string?" He and two other local artists held an exhibition on rust, for which they were constantly harvesting items from the scrap metal pile at the local recycling centre where I work. One day he informed me that there was a new cult in town. When I expressed shock and was quite affronted that there was a new cult, he informed me that they're called the Rastafarians. He loved second-hand shopping and became a resident antiques and special items consultant at the recycling centre shop, once famously purchasing a Paul Hartigan painting donated to us. Other items he passed off, saying, "That's NVG," which my boss Trina soon learned stood for not very good, rather than some special brand or antiques company. When I decided it was about time to get my license at the tender age of 26, John gave me lessons in his little car into the city and back in the evenings, tempted of course by the prospect of attending exhibition openings in town. John would often fall asleep on the way home, and I drove very carefully during these unsupervised times. John was forever an art teacher, always helpful and encouraging towards myself and other new artists, inspiring us with items from his collection and purchasing our pieces for himself. When I needed a misty morning for a photograph I was planning, he would text me at 2 a.m. each night, which was generally his bedtime, informing me on the current mist situation and his projections for the next morning. When I got into cyanotype photography and asked if he knew any sources of Kauri leaves, John executed a heist, climbing his neighbour's fence under cover of darkness and collecting leaves from under their Kauri tree for me to make pictures of. John loved to climb. Some would say that perhaps a man of such advanced years could pass on the task of clambering around his extensive collection to his more sprightly assistant. But not John. He took any opportunity to show off his climbing skills on his assortment of suspiciously rickety antique wooden ladders. I've witnessed John in many precarious scenarios, often not quite succeeding in holding my tongue, and our biggest and probably only arguments have been about who should be going up the ladders, or whether his homemade tables were structurally sound. He was fiercely independent, and in some ways I am glad that he never had the chance to lose that independence. John somehow retained his childlike sense of wonder throughout his life and loved new experiences. From his late life international adventures to the time he informed me he just received his first pedicure, and it was an experience of a lifetime, as well as his fishing trip on the Kaipara this year with my dad. "Your father's a gun," he informed me afterwards. "So agile, leaping around the boat. It was wonderful to watch." I will sum up by saying that Mr. John Perry was a valuable member of our community in Helensville. He contributed much to the rich fabric of a slowly gentrifying town, and many have said to me it is strange and sad not seeing his shop open on weekends, but comforting to see a light on upstairs where his sons remain in residence for now. I hope that wherever you are, John, you're as high as a kite in a peach tree, and you'll never be lonesome again.
Thank you, Hannah. Philip Clark, he's on his way up.
Greetings to us all and to you, John. I am now not going to take off my clothes, unlike John Francis Perry, whom I witnessed doing a slow strip at a meeting at the bathhouse in the early 1990s. John was the guest speaker following the AGM of the Rotorua and Districts Community Arts Council. Stepping to the mic after an exceptionally firmly chaired meeting, John was, I recall, overly dressed for indoors in layers of tweed. As we heard that the gallery had just been presented with a collection of ladies' bathing costumes spanning decades, it was John began divesting scarves and tweeds. Soon a rather hairy chest was visible, and it was apparent that John was wearing one of the recently donated ladies' swimsuits. Amidst the shock, surprise, and general mirth, John somehow managed to get out of his trousers and the bloomerish swimsuit to reveal that he was wearing a second swimsuit, a rather sleek 60s number, and little else. I have been to many annual general meetings since, but John's performance has never been bettered. Now, this anecdote is revealing of more than chest hair. It's a powerful demonstration that John felt few boundaries between himself and the objects he was attracted to, relating to them directly and imaginatively. Lots of people have collections, few people have flair. John had it in bucket loads. A decade or so later, when I was the director of Object Space, I really valued his endorsement of this new project, and we got to know each other pretty well. He contributed a number of installations that were conceptually highly original, beautifully installed, and which featured what society had earlier designated as crap and then discarded. John was extremely happy with how the last of these projects had gone, and sometime afterward offered to bring us afternoon tea. And yes, we had whitebait fritters on Ponsonby Road, cooked in a primus in the van. John once described himself to me as a ground feeder in terms of what and where he acquired. John had a number of gifts, a broad and deep knowledge of things, his own weirdly wonderful object taxonomy that enabled him to relate objects that most of us had never thought were connected, and the ability to present objects with incredible visual flair. Some years ago, I bought at Global Village a William Hogarth print entitled A Man of Taste, which satirizes conventional 18th century notions of taste and fashionability. John Francis Perry, I salute you as a man of taste who taught us to look at the world so very differently. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. That's been a most amazing series of remembrances, and I'm so grateful to have heard them, and they bear out everything that I've seen and been thinking about before I make the speech. My talk is in two parts, and you may wonder why I'm talking about an American curator at the beginning of it and not getting on with the job, but the second half, or the second part, justifies the explanation at the beginning. So, okay, here we go. And I haven't got much time, but I was the director of the Robert McDougall Art Gallery in Christchurch for a number of years, and in 1986 it was. I had a communication from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I think it was, and an American cultural ambassador was coming and would be knocking on my door at the art gallery before the gallery opened about 8:30 one morning, and he would happily address the staff if we wished. And so I was eager to see this gentleman, prominent and respected curator. And sure enough, 9 o'clock, the 8:30 or so, he knocked on the door, opened the doors, and there was Charles Eldridge, Dr. Charles Eldridge, curator and director of the American Museum of Art and the Renwick Gallery, two institutions in one, with an umbrella of the Smithsonian Institute over them all. Now, Charles was like a movie star. He looked fantastic. He was tall, blonde, beautifully suited, immaculate manners, wonderful way of speaking, affable, amusing. He was just magic, you see. I thought, oh, I can understand why they sent this guy as a cultural ambassador. And he came in, and we had the chairs arranged for our small staff, and he addressed them. And he gave this marvellous inspirational talk about curators, and what curating was about, and you know, the marvellous things that they had, and enthusiasm that you need on this jaunt, and his senior assistant, Marjorie Black. In the afternoon, and as he told us about it, he emphasised the enthusiasm that curators need by saying that, well, for myself, he said, it's not just the discovery or the finding of an object. He said, when it has a magical source about it, my knees tremble. I get a knee trembler. Well, this stuck in our minds, you see, and we all thought this was amusing. But he talked about the knee trembler. In the afternoon, I took them to a dealer gallery in town, and he went upstairs, so I showed him the contemporary art, and you could see he was bored. He was a man who had studied classics and older history. The Museum of American Art dealt with American art during the 19th century, the 18th century, and what part of it was of the earlier time. So he was frankly bored. But downstairs from that gallery, the Brooke Gifford Gallery, there was a second-hand shop, a pre-loved objects store, we used to call it, people's stuff. And as he came down that stairs, I watched him, and I noticed that his whole frame changed. And he became a kind of a searching, took on a loping stride, and he went through that place like some kind of amazing magical thing. And he was looking side to side and loping through it, and you could see that he was actually taking in everything in that place. Nothing impressed him, but in the end, his attitude changed. There was stuff in it, and he was going to look at it. So then we had to cross the road to get to the car, so we went across, and there was another second-hand or pre-loved store with a bear in a tray outside of it. It was irresistible to him. He had to go in. So we went in, and he looked around, and we expected, and he and myself and Marjorie, his assistant, were standing outside, and we suddenly realised that he'd been a long time in there. So we went in to see what was happening. Shh, he said, shh, I found something. And he was looking at a vitrine, a glass-covered book. And in that vitrine there was a little carved marble hand of a girl, of a baby girl, a small baby girl. It was this Victorian sort of thing. And Marjorie said, what have you got there? What's that? And he said, this is a hand of the daughter of, this is why exactly, Hiram Powers, a work by Hiram Powers, classical 19th century, born and died American sculptor, and a very famous man who did many, many beautiful things. Don't see them here. But he looked at this and he was absolutely rapt. Shh, don't say anything, I want to see the proprietor. The proprietor was a teenage boy, and the assistant was a teenage boy. He came and he took it to the desk, took the top off the vitrine, and Charles studied this object with deep interest and passion. And he looked at it and he said, this is the Hiram Powers, he said to me. And I said, I'm afraid you have the advantage of me. So he told me about Hiram Powers and how important he was to American culture. That was all right. So he said, how much is this object? And the boy said, $95. I will have this object, he said. So the vitrine went into a cardboard box that was available and crushed newspaper all around it, and off we went. When we got outside, I said, well, why do you want that? And he said, The last time I saw one of these Hiram Powers' hands of his daughter, whom I think was Beulah, the name strikes me, when I last saw one of these, he said, it was in the Park Burnett auction and it fetched $11,000. So he was well pleased. So off we went to this, he was absolutely delighted. He went on the tour of New Zealand, visiting galleries, and this is the other interesting part, or the interesting part of the story. He came back to Christchurch before they flew out back to America, and I met him again, and I said, how did you find things? Oh, he said, I saw a lot of things. I said, I went to all the museums and I met a lot of curators. He said, wonderful, wonderful what you've got here. He said, really great. But he said, I met John Perry in Rotorua. Most amazing curator I've ever met. I'm quoting him. He said, we had a marvellous time together. He said, he's got all the interests that I've got. He said, and I was so impressed with him. He said, he's so enthusiastic and he knows this stuff, he knows things, and he chooses the most amazing objects, and he's never without one, and he's always talking about them. He said, we had just a marvellous time. I spent a couple of evenings with him. He said, and at the end of one evening, he said, how'd you like a swim in a hot pool? And well, I haven't got my costume with me. He said, you don't need a costume. He said, it's night time. He said, well, but there'll be lights around. No, there won't be any lights around. He said, we're going to a pool in the bush. He said, and we'll go there. I'll take you there. You'll love it. He said, it'll be great. He said, the moon's out, the night sky's above. He said, you ought to have this experience. Because he'd been shown over the Rotorua Museum, and he'd had just what people have been talking about here, that kind of Rotorua experience John would take you on. And he was absolutely, so they went to the pool. And it was on a stream, it was heated from the below, you know, and he said it was just amazing. He said, he said to John, he said, but I haven't got a costume. John said, you don't need a costume. Nobody will see you. There won't be anyone there except us. He said, we'll just lie about and have a yarn and look at the sky. And that's exactly what they did. But he was a distinguished American, respected curator who had met many, and his opinion of John Perry was of the highest order. So that's my story about John, and I thank everybody for their marvellous recollections of John that sort of supports that experience that Charlie Eldridge had with John Perry. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you. We're now going to hear from Paul Hartigan, who has some words to share. Kia ora, Paul.
Kia ora, welcome everybody. It's a very full room. Amazing to see everybody and a great celebration. John Perry, collector extraordinaire, the unstoppable foreverness, the snap crackle pop of the man and his mana. And the show of people here today is surely the strength of the man we all knew and loved legendary John F. Perry. 2021 marked the 50th year of our artistic and collegial friendship. I'd met John in the early 1970s. That essentially what I would call knucklehead New Zealand era, when it was dangerous to walk down the street wearing bell-bottoms. People like mentor Tom Chrysler and Fizzy John Perry were the path through to the new world, that which we inhabit now. If I stumble or bumble today, forgive me. Intensive radiation therapy on my neck and throat during 2020 has annoyingly curbed my speaking ability. And nobody talks more than I do. Well, maybe Dick, but nobody is more loquacious than me. But wait, John Perry would always beat me hands down. Unfortunately for us all, John has left the room mid-conversation. Elvis of Geyserland, the ambassador of Zealandia, has now left the building on an interplanetary forage. Purveyor of the esoteric and king of the idiosyncratic, John Perry's eye and collective aesthetic was vast, broad, individual, yet knowledgeable, both sophisticated and refined. The Perry collection was beyond most people's parameters of what a collection might include. John's specialty were collections within a collection, be it fine art, folk art, ethnology, pulp novels, war or comic art, art of the unknown from the outsiders, or as many have noted, just completely unmemorable, essentially junk, valueless, worthless things that, as Dick pointed out, John could somehow elevate in his hand to the Holy Grail, the thing that you'd suddenly desperately wanted. And why hadn't you noticed it before? Him. This is John. He's just extraordinary, incredibly inspiring human being. I loved him. No one was more able to identify, communicate, or comment on the intrinsic worth of any artistic thing or Indigenous artists you never heard of, just people out of the woodwork, the most obscure, esoteric people. His take was always illuminating. This was the key to the man, his mind, a vast archive. As his family, as his sons said, a kind of New Zealand history repository, one almost beyond our comprehension. It was not just the collective subject matter knowledge, but the minutiae of any of the subjects, and with riveting associated stories about artists like Teo Schoon, the stories that John told about Teo and his, kind of personal likes for, what was it, the Big Mac, just kind of blew me away. I was like, wow, Teo, the holy grail, of New Zealand art, to me anyway, and here's this guy who was just hell-bent on, John, can you go and get me another Big Mac? It was just so fascinating. Or Tony Thomason, for example. John was an intrinsic part of that Christchurch boho milieu. We had met 50 years ago. Half a century ago, I'd met John in Auckland in 1971. I was a raw, naive art student fresh up from cow country, the Taranaki, protege of Tom Chrysler and a disciple of Don Driver, who I grew up with, the magician Don. John Perry was remarkably similar to Tom with his art mannerisms and essentially, what could we say, quirky disposition. John was the most avid collector I've ever known. I'm a collector, I've got a lot of shit. I know people who've got a lot of shit. I've got a building in Greyland full of a lot of shit, but it's a drop in the ocean compared to the collection of John Perry. It's beyond comprehension. It's the thickest book. It's the ultimate Bible. He was the most avid collector I've ever known. He was the ultimate authority on seemingly everything, and yet utterly, and this is so important, and yet utterly respectful towards his colleagues and friends. He was never ever competitive. He may have been unreasonably enthusiastic, but he was never ever competitive, one-upmanship, and he was never ever a pompous ass. And the art world is full of pompous asses. It's thick with them. He was an educator. He loved to expand the picture for you. Cliche. He'd reveal details, excuse me, in an X-ray kind of way. It was almost forensic, his fever and passion for, well, anything and just everything. He was literally a walking, talking encyclopedia, so fantastic. And then there was the familiar, and I can't do this very well, but his brother did it perfectly, right, well, you know, and then, you know, John was off on some incredible, you know, long-winded, taking forever story, and I'd have to go, John, I really got to take a piss, all right? Oh, really? Oh, okay. Oh, well. I'll finish with a poem I wrote. Small town Helensville, the last picture show. There seemed no visible end to the great seething mass of collector sass, the gargantuan, cacophonous display on show that day at the Region during our January pilgrimage to rural Helensville's old picture theatre. Standing outside the rip-roar by of endless passing cars and loud noise motorcycles, our mutual friends, Elsie and Pierre Perdue, together we pose for a group selfie. Amid the din, I realised a whole 20 years had passed since my last 2001 visit to the theatre of the absurd, as John loved to call it. Well, there are obviously various names. The Theatre of Dust, the Theatre of the Absurd. I know there was a lot of other theatres of whatever. That inherent kind of Dada and vaudevillian tone, Dada and vaudevillian tone, intrinsic to his always animated existence, that ever-present, effervescent Perry wit would always make your day. Pardon me, tripping up on my own words. Anyway, that lazy summer month, a sense of urgency somehow gripped me, and I said to Eda, we must visit John Perry in Helensville. When? This weekend, I insisted. Timing. Just soon enough, as it turned out. Valo, John. Explore, pardon me. Valo, John, explore that universe. Thank you.
Next up, we're going to have some words from Jan Byringer, who unfortunately got stuck in Wellington. I did notice it was quite foggy this morning when I woke up, but Jeff Thompson is going to help us out by saying the words, and I'm going to play something. Now, what goes first, the words or the video? The words first? Words first, video second. I'm going to cue things up, and I'll let you say the words.
I'm back. Look, this is, I got an email through from Jan today just to say sadly the plane that she was on had been cancelled, so that she couldn't make it. So look, Lute and Jan sent me this to read out. It's quite funny. There's a lovely anecdote in here. This is from Lute. Reconnecting with John after several decades of disconnection has been a rich and wonderful journey over the last 2 years. As Jan and I availed ourselves of his acting and anecdotal storytelling talent for the Teo Schoon documentary we are finishing for this year's International Film Festival program. I should say they're watching us right now too. Editing film is perhaps one of the most arduous parts of filmmaking as one tries to prune any excess footage with regret and editing. John is no mean feat. As you will see from the clip, readily indicates the man's gift of the gab. Apart from many hilarious episodes shared during our respective directorships in the 70s and 80s at the Rotorua, Manawatu and National Art Galleries, frequently at Gallery Directors' Council meetings around the country, it is perhaps the much earlier anecdote from our joint student days that stands out as an indicator of John's daring, amusing cheek and improvisational skills. In the early 60s, the annual university tournaments in August were still combined affairs with the arts and sports fraternities joining together in week-long festivities. The tournament on this occasion was in Dunedin, and berefit of spare cash, many of us would hitchhike all the way, often on a competitive basis. Who gets to the ferry terminal in Wellington first for the Wellington Christchurch overnight ferry? About to embark on the overnight ferry, I observed the loading of passenger baggage, quayside by way of a gantry about to lift the baggage pallet, when John hopped onto the pallet, minus today's obligatory fluoro jacket or hard hat, and signalled to the amazed wharfies to lift the pallet deck side. Once deck side was reached, John duly hopped off and disappeared as a student stowaway for his free overnight at a Christchurch. I never did find out whose cabin he stayed in or which lifeboat he bedded down in. That's from Lute Byringer. Now Jan has added to this, it was great regret that Jetstar cancelled my flight this morning. No apology and an ungracious offer of a refund, God damn it. Just before you see the clip, I need to tell you I sent the fine cut to John to view. John was helping me organise a screening in Rotorua. I was nervous about his reaction. What if he didn't like it? The next morning, an astoundingly positive response came back. I can tell you how pleased we are that John saw the film himself before he died. John always gave us a new lens to look through, which I really appreciated. Araha nui, John, Jan and Lute.
Ready?
In large measure, Teo being refound, retained, re-embraced by New Zealand culture is because of Mr. John Perry. In his capacity, yes, a round of applause, please.
I bought a few souvenirs of our time together because we lived together for about a year. Teo Schoon's cup. Okay, and this is made in America. It was one of his prized possessions, and it happens to come to me. And what's interesting about it is that this was one of his life support systems, okay? And it was, it made many cups of coffee. And the story goes, and it's quite an interesting one, when I went over to Kempsey to visit Teo, he was living in a place called West Kempsey, 500 miles north of Sydney, in a little curious village. He asked me to make a cup of coffee because he was very invalided at the time. I mean, he's seriously invalided and crippled with emphysema, and he didn't do a lot of walking, let me assure you of that. And I remember making him a coffee, you know, and it was Nescafe. I'll just put it down here with these. Nescafe, condensed milk, carnation condensed milk, and boiling water, and then sugar, and then vigorously stirred until the spoon could just about stand up in the cup. And I made him a cup of coffee. Now, Teo, the reason I've selected this place is because Teo was living in West Kempsey on a plinth on a big double bed in the middle of a lounge, surrounded by something I'm very familiar with, chaos. And Teo, I was looking for somewhere to put the cup of coffee, and I committed the cardinal sin. I put the cup of coffee on the drum. There's not been a lot of mention made of Teo as a collector, but he was blessed with the collecting gene, as indeed I have been doubly blessed.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you, Jeff. We're now going to hear from Ron Brownson. Ron, I did see you earlier. Here is. Now, Ron, I also have some slides, and I'm going to be directed by you as to when to press the button. So, anytime. You just let me know. Give me the direction when you want the next slide, and I'm just going to set it up. But you choose, Charles. I'm at your disposal.
Kia ora, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Is that okay? A bit closer? Thank you. I just don't want to turn into an auctioneer. Right at this moment. Is that okay? You can hear me now? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Charles.
You don't want it to be too loud. So
No. Okay, thanks. I bring you greetings from Auckland Art Gallery, Toi o Tāmaki, family of John Perry, all his friends. It's wonderful just to have that voice of John. I was walking out from the funeral of Ron Sang yesterday in Remuera with a friend, and I thought of the beginnings of Charles Dickens' book, Hard Times, where Mr. Gradgrind, this dreadful teacher, says, facts, 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 you all need facts, as if facts can be the answer to everything. But I was thinking, this is a fact about John Francis Perry, Curator Emeritus, esteemed collector of collections, the like of which Aotearoa is never going to see a curator like him again. There is no one, I think, in any private capacity or any public capacity that has his knowledge. And it's unlikely that there will ever be anyone in the future that will have his knowledge, and no one will be able to form a collection like he found. So, as a collector, as a curator, John, I must call out 3 remarkable exhibitions you organized at what was then Rotorua Art Gallery. Each was outstanding, each was unforgettable, and each was a celebration of the artwork of Mark Adams, Murray Grimsdale, and Teo Schoon. And John was totally right. Teo liked his coffee greasy, and he would smoke Lucky Strikes, and his preference was not Big Macs, really, as much as crab sticks. I spent 3 weeks with him at West Kempsey, and I've never smoked so much cigarettes without smoking cigarettes. I named you Curator Emeritus, John, but I can equally logically name you Mr. Curator Maverick. Maverick, because all that you've ever been involved with is groundbreaking. Speak, memory, for this man of imaginative empathy. You and Barry Lett opened the Uptown Gallery at 478 Queen Street in May 1964. Was anyone here at that opening? I think you'll agree that that initiative of Barry, that initiative of John, really set up an ongoing template for dealer galleries in New Zealand and led to the establishment of Barry Lett's own gallery. It's necessary to say that fact because such was John's prescient insight that he was really operating at a time ahead of us. Although he was so obsessed with the past, he was always thinking about meanings that can be made more in the future. John, you and about 70 others gathered with Peter Webb, Hamish Keith, and Colin McCann for their opening event of Cordy's Auction House in Emily Place. That was 1964. And then, John, you were also at the opening of Webb's Auction House and Gallery in 1976. And if my memory speaks the truth, you were wearing a combination of a very large bow tie and a tweed jacket. For me, you were so funky and the epitome of what's entirely bohemian. John, you've spent thousands of hours at auction houses, at galleries, at garage sales, at markets, and at exhibitions openings. You get around. You always get around. And knowing all this, I'm just going to share very quickly a little bit about you and your collecting. It's your life's predatory addiction from my decade friendship. You frequently say, it's like forensic diagnosis, almost like forensic self-diagnosis. This is what you say, John. I believe in replacement therapy. In no way do you mean that every item in your Yorping collection is in any way replenishable or replaceable, but sometimes you do let certain things out. They can escape. They can find another kaitiaki, if you like. Well, about 90 days ago, John asked me upstairs to go in front of the cupboard, and he opened it with the sliding lock. And after 35 years of waiting, he said, "You can have it now." Okay, I was waiting for the next thing. There's always a wee test with John sometimes, a wee test. If he's going to release something to your care, you have to earn the right to be that kaitiaki. And he said, "Yes, you can have it." I said, 35 years, thank you. I was sort of shaking. but I did know I would get it someday. He says, but only if you choose the other thing that you are going to buy. I've already selected for you. So I was allowed to have that item A if I discovered what item B was, and I had to tell him what it was. And I knew exactly what it was, and he says, "You passed." That's John. But, you know, there's some wonderful adjectives, there's been some wonderful words, there's been some real blood and tears shared today. And for the last 24 hours, I've just been thinking about maybe sharing a couple more nouns, if I may. They're nouns, John, that for me are an incarnation of you and for you. These words demarcate and circulate about the reality you inhabit and what it means to be a primo expert, an uber connoisseur. He talks about dust, but he has more taste than anyone I know, really. 1,000% knowledge-infected fanatic, an embodiment of the ardent aficionado. John, you are a mensch. A mensch is the incarnation of integrity, and a mensch is the incarnation of honor. That's mensch. There's another Yiddish word, but it's not chutzpah. That's not John, that's not you, John, in any way at all. Chutzpah is the habitation of impudence, of gall, of cheek, as well as conspicuous and fragrant boldness. No, not you. John, the other Yiddish noun for you is maven. 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 Maven means in our English language, they know. They know. He knows, she knows. It is a knowing. Maven is a knowing, which is a way more extensive, more expansive, and more comprehensive than any neutral expert's knowing. Obsessive collectors who are mavens are uber rare. Not even 0.1% of our population is a maven collector. Mavens inhabit life and they mirror life. They realize in their collecting what it means to breathe as a devotee, to perceive as an electrostatic commitment to enthusiasm, to yearn as an overarching adherent, to suffer being a 360-degree fanatic, and to be known as an acknowledged addict. You accepted early on that there's no cure for being a maven. You also accepted that you're addicted to intuition because it's the blood and guts that drives instinct. You know John Perry, John Francis Perry. Your intuition has morphed into the quintessential motivation and attribute of your exceptional insights. So, John, no one here can deny you emanate a precisely tuned radar. A radar for things, a radar for items, for articles, for entities, a radar for objecthood, for materiality, for texture, for patina, for design, for Gesamtkunstwerk, the synthesis of the arts. You intuit excellence. Your senses know before your mind understands what you are connecting with. You feel within your body the whereabouts of treasures before they are physically proximate. John, you do not have an ambiguous legacy. Your life, your example are already a comprehensive influence on us. All your friends here evidence that fact. This fact, we celebrate you, John Francis Perry, and bear the ineffable effect and joy-filled influence of your life in our hearts. So, John, now, Voyager, remember, John, the cry of the mariners, patron St. Michael, look homeward, angel.
Thank you, Ron. I'd now like to welcome Ewan Mackenzie Bowie up to the stage, who is going to share some words with us.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ewan Mackenzie Bowie. I'm the Director of WEBS, and I'd like to repeat the warm welcome that Charles extended to everyone at the beginning of this afternoon. It's a tremendous honor for Bruce and me and the whole WEBS team to welcome such a distinguished collection of New Zealand art nobility to celebrate this wonderful man's life. I only knew John for the last 3 years since Bruce and I acquired WEBS. I don't have stories to tell about him, although I think we've heard plenty of wonderful stories. But I just want to say that right from the start, he was a friend of ours. He was obviously always a friend of Peter Webb and WEBS, and we took on a very substantial heritage, which gave us a lot of pause. And John was one of the first people to warmly welcome us into the art auction world. And within a few days of our acquisition, he wrote a beautiful article for the AASD, the Australasian Art Sales Digest, about WEBS rising like a phoenix from the ashes of moss green WEBS. So we remember him with great fondness. I don't have stories, but I do have a poem, and I'd like to read a very short poem by James K. Baxter called High Country Weather. Alone we are born and die alone, yet see the red gold cirrus over Snow Mountain shine. Upon the upland road, ride easy, stranger, surrender to the sky your heart of anger. Thank you.
Thank you, Ewan. I'd now like to invite Murray Grimsdale up to the microphone to share some of his experiences with John. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the people to whom this loss is the most extreme. Felicity, I mean, we've been friends from the early 60s, and you and John were an amazing couple, very influential on me. You had style, and you had an eye for beautiful objects and the way of arranging things and all that sort of thing. And very creative, of course. And so I found soulmates, not cellmates, soulmates, I should say. And that came later. And Jacob and Jerome, wherever you, oh, there you are. You were the cutest of little babies. And you're also lovely boys when you used to come up to Pakari and play with Bella and Rewa. Very, very nice. And thank you for asking me to speak today. And to Jenny B, hello, way over there in central France. Jenny B has a certain type of humour that she inherited from Puff and Toddy, and I think you, Tim, have inherited that as well. So it's great to see you again. Renee, there you are. Yes, great times that we had. Unfortunately, I got unwell and came home early, but one thing I remember is being with you and how excited you were in the fabric collection at the Victoria and Albert Museum. there have been photographs of John and me at the Pompidou Centre. And I remember that John and I were looking at some Matisses with tears in our eyes. And that's one of the most exciting times I ever spent with John, was going around galleries in Paris and London and Singapore. John had a witty, subversive, intelligent sense of humour, and that's something I miss. And I miss it with other people who have died. I'd like to mention Warwick Broadhead, who had the most amazing, edgy sense of humour. And sometimes he and I would be carrying on, and Bunny would say to us, "You guys are absolutely porangi." And we were, I think. And another person I'd like to remember is Charlie Rose. He had a very particular, unique sense of humour, and I miss him very much too. Now, many friends were born in 1943, myself included, and John, of course. Sadly, Malcolm Cheadle died too young. He was 43, baby too. And Wong Sing Tai, and Vanya Lowry, Enid Erickson, Dick Frizzell. Any other 1943 babies? I don't know, but we were all very close. Well, still are, yeah. Another thing I'd like to mention, I know that John is, the passing of John is the kaupapa, but there's also another friend who has died recently, and that's Fane Floors. Just a few days ago, he died. And he was a great musician, a great artist, and he had a very particular sense of humour as well. So he also did the Underwater Melon Man with Arthur Basting, who was somebody else that we miss terribly. I don't know if Jean is here, but she knows how much people miss Arthur. He was an amazing person in the music world, just as John was an amazing person in the collecting and art world. John had a sort of proud humility. He could bed down in the most uncomfortable places. When we travelled, I couldn't. On our last trips, I was too old to sleep on a dirt floor and, really rough it. But he was also a dandy vagabond, I thought. The way he dressed, or the way he arranged objects, either in a domestic setting or in an art gallery. It was amazing. One of the most exciting exhibits we saw together, there were some photographs of us at the Pompidou Centre, but it was the collection of André Breton, which is, I think, a permanent display at the Pompidou. It's from about here to that wall over there, a vast collection of that Breton had made. And it was oceanic art, African art, Giacometti, various others, and John was just absolutely overwhelmed. It looked like the person who had curated and arranged that exhibition must have been a soulmate of John's as well. It was just how John would have arranged all these amazing objects. That leads me to thinking about Miro, Joan Miro. One of John's most cherished memories was shaking the hand of Miro when he met him in Barcelona. And now some people have stolen my thunder a wee bit here and there, Dirk and others, but that's fine. You've heard those stories. And what else have I got? Oh yes, one last thing. One project that John and I didn't get off the ground was for me to illustrate a book of Arawata Bill. Now, I think this is John's favourite poem. Of course, it's too long to read now, and it's not good to just read out little chunks. But if you get a moment when you're thinking about John, I suggest you could read Arawata Bill. Arawata Bill was always passionately searching for gold, but John was searching just as passionately, but it didn't have to be gold. Some of the things you see here, have no intrinsic monetary value perhaps, but they're treasures. And he opened our eyes, or a lot of people's eyes, to objects that are precious and beautiful but may not be valuable. But an old set of steps or a ladder or a teacup or something like that, he would find great beauty in the most simple objects. Now, I think is there one more speaker?
There is one more. There is one more, yeah.
One more speaker.
Yeah.
We're going to do a waiata, but we'll wait for the next speaker and then we'll sing. Thank you.
Jay. I was going to have a few words from Jay Esser.
Hello, friends. My name is Jay Esser, for those who do not know me, and a dear friend of John's. We regret this going so long, yet we specifically did not have a timeline like most exciting auctions and no intermissions. I would like to begin this tribute to my dear friend John with a thank you to the Perry family for supporting this celebration, and also most gratefully to Webb's for volunteering use of their premises for this occasion. Thank you all for being here from all over Aotearoa to honor our dear friend John, and to everyone who has spoken so fondly and lovingly about John. It has been enlightening listening to many of these tributes to John, and so many warm, wonderful, historical, humorous, typical JP escapades. Thank you for all these amazing tributes to this very special man. My first draft refers to John as a human being, yet I changed this to man, knowing John would appreciate the abbreviation. John was both a wonderful human being plus a fantastic friend to many. We know all of you are here because John has touched your heart as he has mine. My wife and I have only known John for about 8 years. We first met at John while attending art auctions. I was intrigued about this person at the back of the room who corrected the auctioneers on the descriptions of items on offer. This is not a print. It is whatever it may have been, he would always do. Strangely, people are still flocking to him at the end of every auction. Knowing John has enriched our lives. We appreciated his art knowledge, his quirky personality. We forged new friendships with the people we met through John, many of whom are here today. As I lost both my parents these last 6 years, John helped fill this void at a time in my life with wisdom and kindness. Many of you know that John had his own room and key to our warehouse. For the last few years, John would arrive most weeks at our Ellerslie warehouse on Mondays before heading off to the Cordy's auction early the next morning. John would have his peanut butter sandwich and black coffee for breakfast before departing for his day job at Cordy's. Sometimes he would return during the day for a break from the long days for a yarn, coffee, and another sandwich. We would always encourage John to stay over and have dinner with us, knowing how much he enjoyed the peace and quiet, rather than staying awake, listening to the semi-trailers rocketing past his cinema in Helensville. However, we suspect it might be the TV that got his attention. John did not have a TV at home, so he was fascinated with what was on the screen. Sometimes we had to distract him or turn off the TV when he came for dinner, especially when Antique Pickers was on. We will always reflect how John taught us to hang paintings in his own unique and precise way. We had plenty of practice hanging artworks when we and our business assistant Paul assisted John hang over well over 150 artworks in our warehouse gallery. This permanent and thoughtfully curated gallery is another legacy of John. It is a reminder to me every day when I am working or wandering in the warehouse that John will remain a major part of our lives, and the gallery is a testament to his knowledge and skills. John was a patient teacher. He has taught us about collecting art, hanging art. He told us stories and the relationship of artists and their artworks. He instilled in us to build a coherent art collection. John was our personal art consultant and helped us select over half the artworks we now own. John was an artist too. He gave his friends many of the artworks he made for enjoyment. Some of his artworks are here on display today. Thank you, Richard Wilf, for hanging these. John was an adventurer at heart. John would ride on my motorbike to the annual visits to the art fair at the Cloud as we split lanes through rush hour traffic. John was never one to shy away from a thrilling bike ride. John was a close friend of Theo Schoon. A few years ago, with John's suggestion, I purchased the Theo Schoon blocks that John had printed from many years ago. Imagine his delight that he could finally have another round of using these blocks more than 35 years later. Hamish shared more stories and one of these blocks earlier. For well over a year, John had been planning to meet up with his good friend Jim Geddes at the Eastern Southland Gallery in Gore, who you heard about earlier from Cyril Wright. John had been planning this limited edition print run with Hamish Coney, the Schoon family, and Jim Geddes. Some of you have already been promised a set. As this plan was getting closer to fruition, JP recently picked up the Schoon blocks from our warehouse. While waiting for the blocks to be transported to Gore, John printed a few of these blocks in Helensville for practice. He later then asked me if I minded if he distributed a few copies to friends. What could I say? It was done and dusted, and prints already distributed. Of course, I said, not at all. I recall he gave me one of these prints. I cannot find the print at my place now because I may have given him this back to him at the time and told him I wanted the real prints later. For those of you who have received and loaned these prints for today's celebration, please treasure these prints, as these are likely the last prints John produced. These are now original, signed, JP, TS, JE, initialed, and dated prints. When these blocks are used for this limited edition print, it will also include a tribute to John Perry. John was an avid collector. I have spoken to many people these last few weeks while assisting organizing this event. One conversation really resonates. John's dear friend Bronwyn has known John for more than 35 years. She often harped on to him, as we used to do, why does John continue buying at auctions when he kept saying he wanted to slow down, sell up, and travel the world? John's answer, which I did not know until recently, was, it gives him joy. John loved buying at auction. He lived for auctions and did not worry too much about how much stuff he had collected throughout the years. John was happy when he won at auctions. Ironically, John left his last receipt from Cordy's from May 31st at my warehouse a few weeks ago. There is only one letter difference between my name and John's answer of joy, so I too will keep this in mind, as it gives me great joy to help organize this celebration for our dear friend John. With this in mind, I would like to extend my appreciation to all of you who are here today to celebrate John's life. And I would now like to extend the many thank yous to everyone I can now recall who have helped to organize this event. Thank you to Bruce Quinn, Ewan Bowen McKenzie, and especially Paul Evans, who along with Webb staff have exceeded themselves to host and fully organize this event today. Look what they've done. Thank you again to the Perry family and to John's 3 sons, Jacob, Jerome, and Timothy, being here and supporting this occasion. Thank you to the Honorary Stevie Chatwick for your kind words about John and for traveling from Rotorua to be with us today. Further appreciation to Hamish Coney, who immediately started to help with these events and who prepared his special tribute and mihi for John, along with Renee Kim, Jason Burgess, Katie Lockhart, Beth Stent, Jeff Thompson, Richard Wolf, and many more who have excelled to arrange this occasion. Now, I understand there's going to be some sort of ceremony, but then we're going to open up the floor. It's going to take the caterers about 20 minutes to prepare the food, which we're going to open up the floor to a few people, and we'll start that after the next. Thank you, and I'd like to thank Andrew Grigg from Cordy's and Ben Plumley from Art and Object for loaning us the extra chairs for today. Thank you, everyone.
If anyone knows the words to Pūrianei, can you please help us sing?
Would you like microphones?
We don't.
Sing along if you know the words.
Pūrianei e te hau, Horoia e te ua, whiti whitia e te rā. Mahe ake ngā horaurau, makere ana ngā Erere, wairoa erere, ki ngā ao o te rangi. Whiti whitia e te rā. Mahe ake ngā horaurau. Makere ana ngā here. Makere ana ngā here.
Kia ora tātou.
I forgot one thing. I forgot to thank Charles, our master of celebration. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Jay. We're now going to open up to the microphone up to the floor. I'm putting the 20-minute timer on, as requested by Jay. And I believe that we have a gentleman over here that's going to kick things off. So I'll bring the microphone over. And then someone else also reserved the number 2 spot while we were talking earlier. So here you go, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. My name's Andrew Grigg. Known John Perry for maybe the last 35 years, 20 of those working at Dunbar Sloanes down in Wellington, where this unusual character came in, sleeps in his van out on the coast, and helped open my eyes. The last 15 years with Cordy's Auctioneers. Looked through his buying record over that time, over 400 auctions. Every week, nearly, he would be there either viewing or purchasing. Just incredible. You look through, and it wasn't just 1 or 2 things. He would be, 6 items, 15 items, 20 items. But you look at what he bought too. It wasn't It wasn't Royal Dalton. It wasn't Lardro. It was textiles. It was tribal. It was Melanesian. It was art. Gauguin, chaos, all of that. He purchased all of that. But he did also buy some Doles and some Napoleonic. He changed, when I look at the prices that we've achieved for items in recent time, how there was been global changes. The folk art has elevated. You know, we had an auction there for the Ngāri Heart. The interest that was taken in that was incredible. And a big part of that really is John's opening the eyes and seeing, you know, the piece of chewing gum on the floor as art, and it's really changed it. The books that he's written, the help that he gives us, when he was in the auction room, people would navigate towards him. He was so kind and generous with his time and his giving, and he will be missed by us for sure. Thank you.
Kia ora, Andrew. Thank you, Andrew. Now, I gave a microphone earlier to David Barker. Have you still got the microphone, David? The second microphone? Where have you gone, David? Oh, there you are. Have you got the microphone? There's another.
I have the microphone.
Kia ora, David.
Yes, thanks. Good evening. My name's David Barker, and everything I've heard today here at this lovely meeting, everything happened after I met John Perry. John Perry and I were first-year students at Elam when we first met, and I haven't heard anybody here or seen anybody who knew him before then. There will be people here, of course, but most of you weren't even thought of when John and I first met. This is very short. John, I'm a painter. John brought into my life a knowledge, a number of things, but one of the main things was that the very pretentious and high opinion that artists had of themselves, we had of the students, was not to be pursued. Other of my mentors, Jim Allen, Bob Ellis, taught me the same thing too, and I'm really thankful that I have not had to be a part of that world in my whole life. I was born in 1941. Thank you, John, for being a part of that.
Kia ora, David. Thank you. Thank you. By show of a hand, who else can I hand the mic to share a story? And over here, it's the first hand I saw.
Thank you. Murray Lane, Nolin's son. You might remember Nolene Healy. Hello, Wiki. Sorry, Wiki, I can't not call you Wiki. You've been Wiki to me since I was much, much younger. And I guess I wanted to say thank you to John for what he did for us as we travelled in and out of town on his Model A getting to these flea markets and the like. But more than that, John saved an icon in Helensville. If you go back a number of years, it had cost us 1 shilling and threepence to see that movie we wanted to see as a kid. The Jaffas would roll down the wooden floor and everybody would, you know, at the inappropriate moment, and it was a great time to be there. John has come along and saved us that wonderful building, and I appreciate that so much. But on behalf of my mother, thank you, John, for all you did for us as a family and for art in Helensville. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Who else may I hand the mic to? By show of hand, there must be another hand there. There were more earlier. Is there another? There must be one more person who I can hand the mic to. There we have it. Fantastic. We spoke earlier.
Hi, I'm Sally. I'm an art therapist. I'm an artist, but I'm not a professional artist. I'm a professional art therapist, and that's how I connected with John through my work with people with disabilities, mental health, and art therapy. He loved what you might call outsider art, naive art, folk art. He loved the just jubilant expressions from anybody, doesn't matter who they were. If the image had heart, John was there and he loved it. And he took the time to come and speak with our team and our artists and appreciate their work. And he's donated to our charity auctions. And I'm also friends with him because I know what it's like to have the collector gene. I had a shop many, many years ago, and it runs in the family. And I've spent a lot of time with John and his theatre, and he just means the world to me. And I just want to reach out to his children. If you ever need a hand, I'm here. It would be a great service to help you in any way. John was just amazing, as you all know. And Renee, he always talked about you. Yeah. I don't know what else to say except you're always with us, John. You'll always be with us. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Who else can I hand the mic to? Are there any other takers? If not, if there are no other takers, in John's honour, I've been asked to do this as one last time, as he'll be with us, one last time here he'll always be with us in the auction room, but one last time. In John's honour, fair warning once, twice. We all done? Goodbye, John. And the food is ready. We have drinks.